Great. Well, it's really good to be here. Thank you for having me again. And because I just flew in yesterday, so I'm really tired, as you can see, I'm going to make you do the work today. So don't think you can get off. I'm going to ask questions. They are simple questions, but they're also questions which will make us think fairly deeply. The answer to the question is never looking at me. Okay? The answer to the question should be in a Bible. Hopefully you've got a Bible with you. Turn with me to Luke chapter 15. I want to read a well-known passage. Luke chapter 15, often known as the parable of the Prodigal Son or the parable of the two sons. And we're going to start off reading that. So it's Luke chapter 15, verse 11 through to 31. I want you to see if you can spot anything you haven't spotted here before. So here we have a parable Jesus told. Luke chapter 15 verse 11. And he, that's Jesus, said, there was a man who had two sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that's coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. And he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to his father, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now his older brother was in the field, and as he came, he drew near to the house. He heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he's received him safe and sound. But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, Look, these many years I have served you. I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, has come, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you're always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad. For this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. Okay, first question, simple question. The answer's not in the passage I've read, but it's somewhere nearby. Who was there when Jesus said this parable? Okay, who was there when Jesus said this parable? Don't look at me. Anyone looking at me, get points deducted. You've got to look at the text. So hopefully you can find a Bible. Share a Bible. Get it on your phone. Don't check your email. Who was there when Jesus said this parable? Tax collectors and sinners. Where do you get the answer from? 15 verse 1. Now tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him, and the Pharisees and scribes grumbled, saying, This man receives sinners and eats with them. And then he tells them, of course, the parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, and the parable of the two sons. Or on one reading, we look at verse 3, and it actually calls all three of them one parable. Okay, where else do we find out who was there? So we've looked before. What happens afterwards? If we look after the passage, do we find any indication of who was there in the audience? Where do we get that from? 16:1, he said to his disciples. Good. Going on a bit further, do we find any other indications of audience? Where are they? Verse 14, the Pharisees, this is chapter 16, verse 14, who were lovers of money, heard all these things, and they ridiculed him. He said to them, you are those who justify yourself before men, but God knows your hearts, for what is exalted among men is an abomination in the sight of God. So there we have clear indication that the disciples are there. We've got tax collectors and sinners there, and we've got Pharisees there, and Jesus is telling these parables. And he begins with, a certain man had two sons. My question is this: where else in the Bible do I get that phrase? Again, don't look at me. I'm not going to give you the answer. Well, I hope not. Genesis, a certain man had two sons. Yeah, I mean, that sort of thing happens in two sons. Yeah, that's good. Who has two sons in Genesis? Abraham and Sarah. Yeah. Abraham gets a few more. Yeah. Who really just has two sons in Genesis? Isaac, thank you. His two sons are? Jacob and Esau. Great, okay, so maybe your mind thinks about that when you've been reading the Bible. But where in the New Testament does Jesus say a certain man had two sons other than in this story?
Zebedee with his two sons.
Yeah, okay, I'm not just, that's good. Zebedee had two sons, but there's a time when Jesus begins a story, a man had two sons. Anyone remember it? Okay, turn with me to Matthew chapter 21, verse 28. Matthew 21:28. Just get this story. So it's not the only time that we have a parable beginning, a man had two sons. As this parable, it's a short parable. Matthew 21:28. What do you think? A man had two sons, and he went to the first and said, son, go work in the vineyard today. And he answered, I will not. But afterwards he changed his mind and went. And he went to the other son and said the same. And he answered, I go, sir. But he did not go. Which of the two did the will of the Father? And that's, the basic story. So it's not the only time Jesus begins, a certain man had two sons. Does anyone know any knock-knock jokes? Okay? One of the things about knock-knock jokes is you can just hear them once, and then you can usually remember them, because they form a certain pattern. And when Jesus begins a story, a certain man had two sons, it's also a way of helping you remember it, because, I bet these two sons are going to be pretty different from each other. It's the way these stories usually go. Okay, a certain man had two sons, and the younger one said to the father, Father, give me the share of the inheritance due to me. How does the father respond? What does he do? Gives it to him. Does everyone think that's the right answer? It's a partial answer. What does the father do? Don't look at me.
He gave it to both of them.
He gave it to both of them, correct. He divided to them the livelihood. Okay? So that means the older brother gets some. Now, let's work it out. What country does this story take place in?
In Judea.
Presume in Judea. Okay, fine. If it takes place in Judea, what's the inheritance share for an older brother? Double. Good. So how much does the older brother get? 2/3. If it's somewhere else, maybe it's not like that. We don't know where the story is set. It's just a story told in Judea. But if it is according to the Jewish rules, then this older brother does very well out of the deal, because this is a fair father. He's going to give the younger son his share, and he gives the older brother his share too. And then after not many days, the younger brother gathers everything he has, and he goes off to a far country. And I want you to notice that word far. And then it says he wastes his property living recklessly. Okay, now let's start with the word waste. Where in this context do we get talk of wasting? There's somewhere in the surrounding area, don't look at me, no one should be looking at me, somewhere in the surrounding area where we get someone wasting money. Where? Try and get a Bible. If you haven't got access to a Bible, I can even lend you mine. Anyone not got a Bible? I want you, this is not an exercise in me giving you the answers. Where in the surrounding area in Luke, do we get talk of someone wasting property? The unrighteous steward. Thank you. Yes, very good. So that's immediately following chapter 16. Chapter 16 and verse 1. And he said to his disciples, there was a certain rich man who had a manager or overseer, and he was accused to him as wasting his property. Right? So we've got two parables of two wasters bang next door to each other. So, this is the sort of thing we're supposed to notice when we study carefully. So a lot of the time what happens when people read the Bible is they go into autopilot. Oh, I know this story. And then you don't notice anything that's actually there. Okay? You know the story. Let's really switch on. So there's two stories of wasters next door to each other. And is the waster in Luke chapter 16 the sort of person you should follow or not? Who says yes? Who says no? Well, all those people who raise their hands, I'm afraid you're wrong. That you're supposed to be like that unrighteous steward. Right? The point is, you're supposed to use what you've got now to make friends that will last for eternity. That's what the unrighteous steward did. He was given notice on his contract. He was going to be out of his job. He knew he only had a short time to continue his corruption. And so he keeps using his corruption to buy friends who are going to land him a job after he's left his job. Have you ever known corrupt people do that? Yeah, that's what corrupt people do. And Jesus says that's exactly the same principle that you need to apply to this life. Not the corrupt bit, but the urgency bit about using the resources you have for a short time to make friends. Right? So, in other words, he's someone that you should be like. Now, what do we know about the Pharisees and their response to that second parable about wasting? They sneered at him. Chapter 16, verse 14. Why? Because they love money. Okay, now, when you hear about someone wasting money, how do you feel? Go on, I mean, really? Yeah, I mean, come on. What emotions? I mean, if you heard about a friend of yours who had given his son a really, set him up with a nice nest egg, and that son had just squandered the whole thing. I mean, the father was a really hard-working businessman. He had set his son up, in a great company. It was really set up, and that son just wasted the whole thing. How would you feel?
Frustrated.
Really frustrated. You probably feel anger, righteous anger about that father who spent all of those years working up the portfolio and the son has just wasted it. And the thing about wasted money is when it's gone, it's gone. I mean, there was that time back in the 1980s when Britain was in a bit of bother because it was buying its own currency to sort of stop it going down. And, one day, I think we spent £15 billion, which was a lot of money back then. And we had nothing to show for it. It was just gone, like wasted. That's the way it is. So what you should be feeling when you hear about this young man is you should probably be feeling quite a bit of anger. He's wasted his loving father's property. What's he been doing? Living recklessly. Okay, how much detail do we have of his life of sin? That's about it. Why don't we have any details about the sins he got into? Sorry? It's not worth it. I mean, as in when you hear a story of sin, you're never better off. Sometimes you have to hear a story of sin. There's a tragedy that's happened to a friend, and you have to hear about how someone double-crossed them and whatever. But you can't say you're any better off for having heard the story. You have to hear it because you're connected with them and you care about it. But sin is completely boring. So Jesus isn't going to waste any of our time telling us about the details of sin. It's completely uninteresting, and there are so many different ways of wasting money. So this man has wasted everything, and then he has spent everything. Then what happens? Sorry?
He comes to his senses.
No, not yet. We mustn't rush ahead. What happens next?
Famine.
A famine. Exactly. Now, in other words, something completely outside his control. He's lost everything, and it's not just that he's lost everything, it's just that when he's down, you know, sometimes disasters happen to people who are already down at the lowest, and they think they're at the lowest. They're not. They actually can get even worse. At this point, a famine happens in the land where he is, and it's a strong famine, and he began to be in want. What does he do in response to the famine? Gets a job. Okay, let's just think about this job. What are the terms and conditions of this job? How is it described him getting a job? What's the word used for him getting a job?
Hired himself out.
Hired himself out. Okay, so it's not that someone hired him. He hired himself out. What's his pay? Zero. Okay. What's he get to eat? Does he get to eat pig food? No. He doesn't get to eat pig food. He wants to have the pig food. In fact, he just wants the worst of the pig food, which is just the husk. He wants the pod, not the really nice bit inside the pod. He would love to have the pod, and he can't. No one's giving him any of the pods. So what he's doing is he's doing a voluntary sort of internship. I mean, he's just saying, please, if I hang around, will you give me something? So you see he's getting no pay. And what animals he's looking after? Okay, now just give me a little rundown on Jewish attitude to pigs. Unclean. Okay, so one of the lowest jobs you can have as a Jew would be a shepherd. I mean, you can see why. It's the sort of job that David's older brothers are going to give to the little brother, because who wants to spend time out on the mountain, you know, in the cold, and you know, not much to do except, oh no, here comes another wolf. And when you do get to fight off a lion and a bear, no one gets to see it. You can't put the videos on YouTube. So, you know, there's no glory in it whatsoever. So what we find is that's a really low job, but you then turn and put pigs on it, and it's even worse. So it's the worst possible job that you could have. And where is he working? Verse 15. In the fields. Okay, let's notice fields. They might come back again. And what do we know about his employer? How's his employer described?
Citizen.
A citizen. What's that imply? Roman citizen. Well, yeah, we don't know the country this is in. So what do we know about this man and his employer? What's the difference between this man and the employer?
He's from there.
Okay, so the employer is a citizen, and this man is a foreigner. He's an alien. I got called an alien recently when I came over here. So, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. He has no rights, no food, no employment, and he's working there out in the fields. It's a terrible situation to be in. And so the use of every phrase like this just rubs it in. And I want you to notice every word in this parable counts. Do you see? That you often just take the big picture. One of the arguments for me for the inspiration of the Bible is just a story like this. When I read it, I can see there is no unwasted word. Every word is just packed with real impact. And so what we see is this man reaches a very low point. He desires just to be filled with the worst of the food. Then what happens is, amazingly, he comes to himself. How does he come to himself? It doesn't explain, but he wakes up. And that's often the way it happens spiritually, that you're in a really dire situation and then suddenly you wake up. You realize what a crazy situation you're in. Now, he had loads of opportunity before then to see his crazy situation. Every time he was spending money and losing money, he had time to see his crazy situation. He could see the crazy situation before he even went to his employer. But it actually took him to get to this low ebb before he finally realized it. And so he comes to himself and he thinks about his father's hired servants. Now, tell me about his father's hired servants. What do they get as pay? Yeah, well, they get pay, don't they? I mean, sorry, and it's a really obvious point. This man doesn't get any pay, and he thinks about the working conditions he's in, and he's in want, and what are they? They're abounding, it says, doesn't it? And here I am perishing with famine. I know I'm going to go to my father. I'm going to say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he comes to that recognition. He realizes he has to fess up that he's been going the wrong way. He's not worthy to be called the son, and he's going to come back. So he really accepts the status of non-son in order to go back to his father. And he then starts returning. And then we read, when he was still far away, his father saw him. So we've already had that word far away once. He went to a far land, and now when his father's far away, or when he's far away, his father sees him. Why does his father see him? He's standing there looking for him the whole time. Okay, so we've got the story so far. I want you to pretend you've never read the story before. So he's still far away. The father sees him. What do we expect the father's emotion to be, seeing this man who went off with, cartloads of wealth, coming back as he is? Yeah, if you're concerned about, the bottom line, the money in the bank, then you're going to feel anger that all of that you had worked towards has been wasted. And what does he feel? In fact, compassion. Okay, he runs. How old is the father? Let's work it out. 50, 60. How do we get there? Well, he's got adult sons, hasn't he? So, I mean, that doesn't quite, give us an exact figure, but we imagine he's getting on. And it seems to have taken quite a bit of time. If we say that all these years at the end of the parable have been all where the older brother talks, years since the younger brother left, then that would add on extra time. So he's got a bit of age on him, and he runs, and he falls on his neck and kisses him. We're going to come back to that phrase. The man starts out on his speech, Father, I've sinned before heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. He doesn't actually get a chance to finish his speech. Father says to the servants. What's the very first word the father says, most translations? Quick. Now, why does he say that word? Why that word? Quick. I mean, what's the rush? I mean, the guy's been away for a long time, so why is he in a rush now?
Is he dying of hunger?
Sorry? Dying of hunger?
Maybe he's frail.
Maybe he's frail, yeah. Okay, let's just think about time. How has time passed from the father's perspective since the son went away?
Slow.
Yeah, I mean, it's like really slow. That's the thing. And the moment the son's back, there's no time to waste. Quick. Now that's an interesting dynamic, because that's basically the way it should be when anyone wakes up and turns away from their sin towards God. All of those wasted years, you might come to God when you're 60, you might come to God when you're 70. It doesn't matter how much time's been wasted, now there's no time to waste. So that word to me is a really powerful word. Quick, bring out for him the best robe, and put on, give a ring on his finger and shoes on his feet. Okay, I want to know, where in the Bible does that happen to someone? Where else in the Bible? Yep. Joseph, thank you very much. So we go to Genesis chapter 41, verse 42. I like it when people have the answer. So remember that Joseph has been in prison. Joseph gets brought before Pharaoh, and then what happens is, it says, then Pharaoh took his signet ring from off his hand, put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. So in other words, we see that sort of quick transformation also happening with Joseph. This man has really been fully accepted back. And then they need to kill the very best calf, and they're going to celebrate. Where else have we had the word celebrate in the surrounding context?
Lost sheep.
Lost sheep?
Lost coin.
Lost coin. Okay, they both have that word, celebrate. That's a really important word. Okay, because this my son was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found, and they began to be merry. Well, that's a great ending, isn't it? I mean, the story could have just ended there, except it couldn't, because the main point comes after that bit, depending on who you are. So, the older brother was in the field. What was he doing in the field? Working. Okay, so was this the sort of guy you'd want to employ? Yes, absolutely. He's a hard-working person. And what happens is he comes near to the house, and he hears the music and the dancing, and he calls one of the servants and finds out what's happening. And the servant replies that it's his brother, your brother. Now notice that phrase, your brother has come, because we're going to notice that there is an affirmation by the servant that this man is his brother. And your father has killed the fatted calf because he's got him back well. How does the brother respond? He's angry. And who would you expect to feel that? The father. Okay? So it's interesting that it's the brother who feels what the father would have thought. Yeah?
Does the brother know that does the older brother know that the younger brother has squandered all of his money and gone through all this pain and suffering?
Well, he doesn't seem to know very much at all.
So he may think the guy's come back in a BMW and he's...
Yeah, but he's still angry. You know, whatever he knows, he's angry that after his younger brother walked out on the father, which, you know, given that one of your basic commands is honor your father and your mother, this is, you know, the most terrible thing to do. The fact that his father has accepted him back and is celebrating about him, you know, is terrible. And so he is angry. And it's almost like he's angry on behalf of his father, you'd almost think. But we'll maybe come on to why exactly he's angry. So he's angry and he refuses to go in. So what does the father have to do? Has to go out. So just notice the motion here. And he says to his father, what's his first word? Look. Okay. How does the younger brother address the father? What's the very first word that he uses? Okay, so let's have a look at it. Verse 12, Father, give me my share of the inheritance. When he's preparing his speech, verse 18, Father, I've sinned. When he actually delivers the speech, verse 21, Father, I've sinned. Okay, so one of the things you do when you're talking to your dad, you call him Father. What's the older brother call him? Nothing. I mean, the older brother just says, look, all these years I have been slaving for you. Now let's just think about that. While the older brother's been working for all those years, for whom has he been working? Himself. He's been working for his business. And how does he describe himself? He describes himself as, through these years, slaving. Now, what is his status? Son and heir and owner. And yet he sees himself as a slave, and he sees himself as slaving for his father. Now, is that true? Not at all. But that's the way he sees it. And I never transgressed your command. I mean, he was just a great son, wasn't he? He never did anything wrong. And you never gave me a goat that I could be merry with my friends. Now let's just think about that. Was he vegetarian for all of those years? No. So you don't think he was? Okay. So what's this thing about never having had a goat? Jealous? Okay, now there's a bit more behind it. Never gave me a goat that I might be merry with my friends. Okay. Who's he want on the guest list? His friends. Who's he want not on the guest list? Let's think about this. All of these years I've been slaving with you. Why hasn't the meat tasted nice during those years? I've been slaving for you, and you never gave me a goat that I could eat with my friends. Who's he want on the guest list? His friends. Who's he want not on the guest list? His father. That's exactly the point. Because the point is, if he's got his friends round and his father, somehow it's not quite the party he wants it to be. What's he want to do with his friends? What's the verb? Make merry. Where else does that verb occur in this passage?
With the younger son.
Younger son, they make merry, don't they? With the lost coin, they make merry. With the lost sheep, they make merry. But he wants to make merry with his friends without his father. And the point is, if his father's there, the meat just doesn't taste the same. And then he says, and when this your son. Now, just ponder that phrase. How would the servant describe the brother? Your brother. Okay? And he says, your son, not my brother. You see? Your son, who has devoured your livelihood with prostitutes came. Now, how does he know about the prostitutes? Is it because the younger brother sent postcards and said, I'm having a great time down at the brothel? You know, how does he know about the prostitutes? He doesn't. So why does he think his brother's been with prostitutes?
Well, he may have done some of that himself.
Do you think he was?
Or that, or he
He's a pretty hard-working son.
wished he had.
He wished he had. I think that's exactly right. He has been all these years, he's been eating these meals with his dad, and he's been physically near to his dad, hasn't he? Where's the younger brother been all these years? He's been physically far from his dad. So near and far are really important words in this passage. And what we see is, though this older brother was physically near, he was mentally and emotionally and spiritually far, far away. He just wishes that he could have been doing what his younger brother got up to. And it said, and now that he's come back, you've killed for him the fatted calf. Notice, by the way, what animal he didn't get. What animal the older brother didn't get? The goat. What animal the younger brother gets? The calf. Tell me which has got more body mass, a goat or a fatted calf? Yeah, okay. So everything is just seen in this negative perspective. The father says, child, you're always with me, and everything that is mine is yours. Is that true?
Yes.
Everything?
Yes.
Well, yeah. He gave them the entire inheritance. And he lived on the farm after he'd given it, because, of course, he had that social right. He's the father. But actually, the ownership belongs to the son. But we had to celebrate, because this, your brother, was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Now, how does the parable end? How does the older brother respond?
Not happy.
The older brother's not happy.
We don't know.
We don't know. That's exactly right. Why don't we know? Because Jesus doesn't tell us. Why doesn't he tell us?
It doesn't matter.
Because it doesn't matter how he responds?
He has a choice to make.
Because he has a choice to make. Who said that? Great. I think that's exactly the right answer. Because the point is, you leave the parable open, because the point is, the Pharisees are listening. Jesus loves the Pharisees and he wants them to respond. And they have that choice to make. They have to think about this parable and who they are, and are they going to be far off or not? There's another part of this parable I want us to think about. How did the father respond when the younger brother came back? Let's just go through the words used. What's he do?
He moves quickly.
He moves quickly. So what's he do? He runs, is one word. What else does he do?
Embraced and kissed.
Embraced him, yeah, and kissed him. I want to know where else in the Bible, and there's only one other place, where someone runs towards someone else and embraces and kisses them.
Joseph to his dad.
Not Joseph to his dad, but yeah, you're in the right book.
Praise the Lord.
Jacob and Esau?
Jacob and Esau. Tell me about it.
Well, the younger brother had stolen the inheritance of the older brother and gone away, and then he was coming back very fearful that his older brother would kill him.
Okay, so let's go to Genesis chapter 33 and verse 4. And this is really important to realize. Genesis chapter 33 and verse 4. So Esau wanted to kill Jacob. Who's the older brother, by the way? Esau or Jacob? Esau, okay. And When Jacob had set out from his parents' house, how much did he have with him? Nothing. When he came back, how much did he have? Loads. Okay? And he sent a whole load ahead to try and bribe Esau not to be angry. And what's it say? Genesis 33 verse 4, but Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him. Whoa. So how is the father being portrayed? The father is being portrayed as the older brother from the story, a certain man had two sons. You know the story in Genesis, a certain man had two sons. The man was Isaac. He had two sons. The older was Esau and the younger was Jacob. And Esau's the guy who you think of as rejected by God, isn't he? And Jacob's the one accepted by God. And here we have the amazing thing that the father is being portrayed as running towards the son, the response of that older brother. Why? Why does Jesus tell the story like that? What's he trying to tell us? You see, Jesus turns the story on his head. It's a well-known story. He turns it on its head. Just literary allusion in order to show that, you know, clever. If you're a Pharisee listening to this, you know your Bible really well. Do you think you might spot some of the allusions?
Probably so.
Yeah. Okay. So you think about that father and how the father, how do you expect the father to respond? You expect him to be angry. By the way, they expected Esau to be angry, didn't he? And he wasn't. Yeah. And the amazing thing is that it reminds you that even Esau, that older brother who was rejected, even he had compassion and ran and embraced. The father had compassion and ran and embraced. And are you, the older brother, just going to sit outside and not care? Okay, we thought about the parable. What's it telling us? How do we feel about people who waste money?
Rather poorly.
Sorry?
Rather poorly.
We feel rather poorly about people who waste money. That's a nice understatement. That's great. You know, we feel angry about people who waste money. We feel angry about if there's any public waste of money, you know, any level in government. We feel really angry. We feel angry when, you know, children waste money. We feel angry just at waste of money. Now, I'm not saying that waste of money is a good thing. I don't think waste of money is a good thing. But when we feel angry, how do we feel about ourselves? We feel we wouldn't do that. We don't waste anything. We're good people. You know, we do things right. There's those terrible people who waste money. You know, politicians, terrible people. You know, we're good people, not like them. You know, I mean, that's the way the rhetoric works in England. I'm sure it works over here as well. You know, those terrible people and us good people who just keep on working hard in the field. Yeah? And we're so angry about them. And we feel angry towards, you know, those terrible sinners. I mean, here we are living our righteous lives. And, I mean, do you think there's any danger that we could ever be like Pharisees?
Yep.
So we could be just like that older brother. And how far was that older brother physically from the father? Yeah, he probably never even went on holiday. He just worked in the field all the time. He's always close. He's home every dinner time. How close is he in his heart?
Miles away.
So we could be people, when we're coming along to church all of the time, we are just great older brothers. We could be people who are just doing our bit. We're working hard. We're giving to the church. We're working for the church. We're helping with all the things that need to be helped with. We're behind everything. We're working up. We're not like those terrible wasters. In fact, you know, we think that they need to be kept in quarantine for a good long time. They shouldn't be let in. And what we have is a story of offensive grace. That the Father is so forgiving that he's prepared to accept the Son back and not just say, well, okay, I will give you a job as a hired servant. You know, you have to start minimum wage and we'll gradually work up, maybe give responsibility. He accepts him straight back as his son and kills the fatted calf for him. Now, isn't that a huge thing where you see the love and the grace in the Father's heart, and that's a picture of whose heart? Of God's heart. So we need to get on board with God's heart. Now, this really is an invitation. The wonderful thing about this passage is it can speak to two different sorts of people. It can speak to the sort of people who know that they're not good enough and therefore ready to accept grace. And it also can speak to people who think that they're already good enough and therefore don't need grace. And the point is, they both sets need to come to the Father in that position of love.